The Federal Reserve suffers a fatal conceit. The economy is paying the price.
Hey, Patriots. Welcome back to America First. I'm your host, and if you're tired of watching unelected bureaucrats destroy our economy while politicians play games, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're going to keep exposing the truth that the mainstream media won't tell you.
Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, and this is What's Ahead, where you get the insights you need to better navigate these turbulent times. As expected, the Federal Reserve did nothing on interest rates at its meeting this week. President Trump, before and after the decision, blasted Fed head Jerome Powell. Trump critics say he's jeopardizing the central bank's independence. All this obscures, however, the huge question. Does our central bank know what it's doing when it comes to inflation? The answer is no. The Federal Reserve is doing more harm than good. The world's most important central bank is afflicted with what the late, great Nobel Prize-winning economist Friedrich Hayek called the fatal conceit. The idea that government planners can run the economy better than the free market. They never have, no matter how brilliant the planners were. Markets are people, and around the world each day, they make billions of decisions to buy, sell, invest, start a business, close a business, whatever. People are not machines. Intrusive governments distort economies. Hayek's profound insight applies to the Fed. Our central bank is not running the economy the way communist and socialist central planners do. But the way it conducts monetary policy is based on the patently false premise that to control inflation, it must deliberately try to stimulate or depress economic activity. Fed officials falsely believe that prosperity causes inflation. On that basis, when prices rise, the central bank attempts to slow the economy or even engineer a recession. When things are sluggish and prices are not rising too fast, it aims to lower the cost of money. Their preferred instrument for this kind of economic manipulation is indeed interest rates. What is amazing is how blandly accepted is the idea that the Fed should have the power to try to control the speed at which the economy operates. Parallel to that, few people blink at the idea that the Fed should set interest rates. This is a form of price control or rent control. Interest is the price one pays to borrow or rent money. Borrowers and lenders should set interest rates, not central bank commissars. Even worse is that the Federal Reserve confuses the two types of inflation. Non-monetary inflation is price changes that come from disruptions to production, like natural disasters, wars, or the pandemic lockdowns. Government regulations and taxes can also raise prices. A 10% sales tax will jack up the cost of an item by 10%. Jerome Powell mentioned that tariffs, which are similar to sales taxes, may raise inflation. But that's non-monetary inflation, and the Fed can't cure that by putting its foot on the neck of the economy. What Powell and company can do is control monetary inflation. Monetary inflation is when you reduce the value of a currency, in this case the dollar, usually by creating too many of them. Yet no central bank ever talks about the need for stability in the value of a currency. It's like talking about malaria and never mentioning getting rid of mosquitoes. By falling for the fatal conceit that Hayek warned against, the Federal Reserve is depressing our well-being. I'm Steve Forbes. Thanks for listening. Do send in your comments and suggestions, and I look forward to being with you soon again.
You just watched Steve Forbes break down exactly what's wrong with the Federal Reserve. And folks, this is something every American needs to understand. While Trump and Powell are having their public spat, we're missing the real issue here. The Federal Reserve is fundamentally broken, and it's costing working Americans dearly. Forbes mentioned something called the fatal conceit, coined by economist Friedrich Hayek. This is the arrogant belief that a handful of government technocrats sitting in Washington can manage our entire economy better than millions of free Americans making their own economic decisions. It's the same socialist thinking that has destroyed every economy it's ever touched. Think about this for a second. Every single day, hundreds of millions of Americans are making economic choices. They're deciding what to buy, where to work, how to invest their hard-earned money. These are real people with real skin in the game. But somehow, We're supposed to believe that Jerome Powell and his committee of unelected officials know better than all of us combined. That's not just wrong, it's un-American. The Fed operates on this completely backwards idea that when Americans are prosperous, that somehow causes inflation. So what do? They deliberately try to make us poorer. They raise interest rates to slow down the economy, making it harder for small businesses to get loans, harder for families to buy homes, harder for entrepreneurs to start new ventures. They're literally engineering recessions to fight inflation. Let that sink in. And here's what really gets me fired up. Interest rates should be set by the free market, by people voluntarily agreeing to lend and borrow money. Instead, we have price controls. The Fed is setting the price of money itself. If we tried to do this with any other commodity, everyone would recognize it as the socialist policy it is. But somehow when the Fed does it, we're supposed to accept it as sound economics. Forbes makes a crucial distinction that every patriot needs to understand. There are two completely different types of inflation. First, you have non-monetary inflation. This happens when government regulations strangle production, when wars disrupt supply chains, when politicians shut down the economy over a virus, or when they pile on taxes and regulations that make everything more expensive. The Fed can't fix this by destroying our economy because the problem isn't too much prosperity. It's too much government interference. Then you have monetary inflation, which is when they print too much money and devalue our currency. This is something the Fed actually could control, but they refuse to talk about currency stability. Instead, they focus on manipulating interest rates and trying to micromanage economic growth. Here's what this means for regular Americans. When the Fed raises rates to fight inflation, they're making your mortgage more expensive, your car loan more expensive, your credit card debt more expensive. They're making it harder for your employer to expand and give you a raise. They're punishing savers with artificially low returns and rewarding Wall Street speculators with cheap money for their risky bets. And all of this is based on the elitist assumption that American prosperity is somehow dangerous and needs to be controlled. This is the same mentality that thinks Americans can't be trusted to run their own lives, choose their own health care, educate their own children, or defend their own families. The real solution isn't giving the Fed more power or different leadership. It's getting government out of the business of central planning altogether. We need to return to the constitutional principles that made America the most prosperous nation in history. Sound money, limited government, and free markets. Every time the Fed intervenes in our economy, they're picking winners and losers. They're deciding which businesses get cheap credit and which ones struggle. They're deciding which investments get subsidized and which ones get crushed. This isn't capitalism. Folks, this is crony capitalism where government bureaucrats have more power over your economic future than you do. The Federal Reserve has been manipulating our economy for over a century, and what do we have to show for it? Boom and bust cycles, massive wealth inequality, a dollar that's lost over 90% of its value, an economy that's increasingly dependent on government intervention instead of genuine productivity and innovation. We need leaders who understand that the government that governs least governs best. We need politicians who will stand up to the Federal Reserve instead of using it as a tool for their own political purposes. And we need to educate ourselves about these issues because the mainstream media certainly isn't going to do it. The bottom line is this. The Federal Reserve represents everything that's wrong with big government. It's unaccountable, it's destructive, and it's fundamentally opposed to the free market principles that built this great nation. Until we address this root cause, we're going to keep suffering from artificial economic cycles that hurt working families while enriching the political and financial elite. Patriots, we can't let them continue to destroy our prosperity in the name of fighting inflation. We need to demand real solutions, not more of the same failed policies that have been impoverishing Americans for generations. That's all for today's video. If you found this informative, make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our content. Share this with your friends and family because every American deserves to understand how their government is manipulating their economic future. Until next time, keep fighting for America first.